Gareth, commiserations and thanks for an unforgettable month. How do you sum it up and what have you said to the boys?
It's difficult to put into context.
Gareth Southgate has been linked quite heavily with the United job lately, and while most United fans seem emphatically against the idea, there are some in the press in particular who seem to think that if Ineos do decide to get rid of Erik ten Hag, then Gareth Southgate could be the answer. There's even the likes of Roy Keane and Gary Neville saying they could imagine Gareth Southgate managing Manchester United.
Do we see that? Could see that happening, yeah.
There's also the Dan Ashworth connection. We know that Dan Ashworth is eventually going to come to Old Trafford, and he works with Gareth Southgate for England, where, according to many reports, the two had a very good working relationship. But is Southgate actually the right man to take Manchester United forward? Let's have a look at his career and see where we've got to and what's led us to this place where he's being linked with the biggest job in football. If you want to talk about his managerial career, you have to go back to 2006, where he took over from Steve McLaren at Middlesbrough, ironically, McLaren going on to manage England. His first two seasons at Middlesbrough saw him finish 12th and 13th. Hardly spectacular, although he did manage an 8-1 win over Manchester City before they had loads of money and possibly started cheating. However, in his third season, they were relegated, finishing 19th in the Premier League. Not exactly a golden era in Middlesbrough's history. The following season, Gareth Southgate was sacked as Middlesbrough manager despite leading the club to the dizzy heights of 4th in the Championship. By October, Steve Gibson had had enough, the Middlesbrough chairman sacking Southgate, where he then spent the next 4 years out of work. After 4 years in the wilderness, Southgate took over from Stuart Pearce as the England under-21s manager. And he did have a decent record, to be fair to him. I think his win rate was over 70% with the England under-21s. But when he took them to the Euros, it was a disappointing campaign. The Three Lions finishing bottom of their group. And this was despite having a team that featured the likes of Jack Butland, John Stones, James Ward-Prowse, Jesse Lingard, and a certain Harry Kane. So overall, his win record was great, but in the big tournament, he was found wanting. Luckily for Southgate, while he was busy underwhelming with the under-21s, England manager Sam Allardyce was getting himself in hot water as part of a newspaper sting that saw him sacked as the Three Lions boss after just one game in charge. What started off as a temporary role as caretaker manager has now seen Gareth Southgate in charge of the England team for the last 8 years, overseeing England going to a World Cup semi-final, a Nations League third place, a Euros final, and another World Cup quarter-final. But if you scratch beneath the surface, sometimes when it comes to the big games, when it comes to the finals, those semi-finals, those quarter-finals, Gareth Southgate has been found wanting when it mattered most. England's 2018 World Cup campaign in Russia saw them beat the likes of Panama and Tunisia in the group before losing to Belgium in a game that, to be fair, they could afford to lose. It's actually an Adnan Januzaj goal that saw the Belgians win that one. England progressed to the second round where they faced Colombia, and they needed penalties to beat the Colombians. And let's not forget, this was a Colombia team that were missing their star player in James Rodriguez. But, to be fair, Gareth Southgate got his team through, where they then faced Sweden. An easy game, if we're being brutally honest, and they got through it. They then were up against a Croatia side that had some very, very good players indeed. The likes of Luka Modric, the likes of Ivan Perisic. And despite the Three Lions taking the lead through a Kieran Trippier free kick, unfortunately, they went out in the semi-finals. A good tournament, but it was there for the taking. They could have got to the final. They could have beaten Croatia. This wasn't an unbeatable Croatia team, and England did go into the half-time 1-0 up. But when it came to making the tactical adjustments that were needed, Gareth Southgate just couldn't find an answer to the Croatians. The inaugural Nations League saw England finish third overall, beating the likes of Spain and Croatia before losing the semi-final to the Netherlands and then beating the Swiss in a third-place playoff. For a tournament and a competition, if I'm being brutally honest, I can barely remember, and I don't know much about, and I don't really care about. So I'm not going to give Southgate too much criticism or praise on that front. The 2020 Euros, which actually took place in 2021 due to COVID, saw England get through their group after beating the likes of Croatia and the Czech Republic and drawing with Scotland. The biggest win I think Gareth Southgate has had as an England manager came in the knockout stages in the Euros against Germany, winning 2-0. But this wasn't a vintage Germany side by any stretch of the imagination, but it was an impressive win. Got to give him credit where he deserves it. And England progressed, and they then beat Denmark in the semi-finals to get through to the final. The first final England had been in since 1966, only the second one the Three Lions had ever been in. Gareth Southgate deserves credit for getting us there. However, again, in the final, in the big game, he was found a little bit wanting. Despite England taking the lead through Luke Shaw, the Italians equalised through Leonardo Bonucci, and when it came to penalties, England lost. Southgate made some decisions that were questionable. Bringing on Jadon Sancho and Marcus Rashford just for the penalties seemed like a mistake at the time, and definitely seemed like a mistake as they missed their penalties along with Bukayo Saka as England missed out. Following the Euros, a disastrous Nations League campaign saw England fail to win any of their games, losing 3 and drawing 3, to be relegated, which I didn't even know was a thing in international football, and gives Gareth Southgate the unwanted distinction of being relegated as both a club manager and an international manager as well. The Qatar World Cup saw England beat the likes of Iran and Wales in the group and also draw with the USA to progress through to the next round, where they beat Senegal, a weakened Senegal team, but you have to beat what's in front of you, and they did. That set up a quarter-final clash with France, and this is where, again, Gareth Southgate was found wanting. Some of his decisions didn't make a lot of sense. Giving Raheem Sterling minutes when he'd barely trained after he'd had to travel back to England after his house had been burgled seemed like a bit of a funny decision, especially as well taking off Bukayo Saka, who was terrorising the French defence. He also only gave Marcus Rashford 5 minutes, despite Rashford being England's top scorer for the tournament. It didn't make a lot of sense, and England was sent crashing out 2-1 against the French. England qualified for the Euro 2024 tournament with relative ease, beating Italy home and away and remaining undefeated during qualifying. Listen, to be fair to Southgate, he's done well with England. I'm old enough to remember when England managers didn't always qualify for tournaments. I remember Graham Taylor didn't qualify, Steve McLaren didn't qualify, even Sir Alf Ramsey didn't qualify for the World Cup in 1974. No, I don't remember, I wasn't born, but I know it happened. Also, Gareth Southgate's record in tournaments is very good. A semi-final, a final, a quarter-final. You can't dismiss that. That's an impressive record. He's also done lots of other things that are impressive. He's built up a good relationship with his players. The players all seem to get along. He's also got a good relationship with the press. We remember when England managers used to have this really sort of combative attitude towards the press. The press hated them, the England managers seem to hate the press. He seems to get everyone singing on the same song sheet. He's a very good ambassador in his role as England manager. And there's a lot of things you can like about what Gareth Southgate has done as the Three Lions boss. So why not Gareth Southgate? Well, I'll tell you, it's not what he's done that worries me. It's what he hasn't done. There's lots of things Gareth Southgate has never done. He's never managed in the Champions League. He's not even played in the Champions League, I don't think. I think he's played in the UEFA Cup. I think he's played quite a lot of games there and a couple in the Intertoto Cup, but he's never played or managed in the Champions League. This is something you'd expect a Manchester United manager to have some experience around. I mean, if you look at Erik ten Hag, for example, he has managed in the Champions League. Yes, I know the campaign this season was a disaster, but let's not forget, this is a manager who did take Ajax to the semi-final of the Champions League. That's something that Gareth Southgate has never come close to doing because he's never managed in that competition. Also in the Premier League, Gareth Southgate has only ever managed in the Premier League with one club, and he got them relegated. Now you might say, well, that was a few years ago, that's a bit unfair. Let's not forget, when people were judging Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, when things started to go wrong for him, people were pointing at the fact that he'd only ever managed Cardiff in the Premier League and he got them relegated. If Gareth Southgate comes in and things aren't working out, people are going to look at his time in Middlesbrough and say, look, the proof was there. You should have took notice of it. You also look at what he hasn't done, the managers he hasn't gone up against. He hasn't beaten the likes of Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp, Allegri, Xavi, Arteta. Erik ten Hag has. He's beaten all those managers. He's had a very good record in some big games against those managers. You can't ignore that. That's something Gareth Southgate hasn't done yet. Also, when he has managed in the Premier League, he's finished 12 and 13. He's never finished in the top half of the table. And we're about to presumably get rid of a manager if he finishes 6th, to replace him with a manager who's only ever finished in the bottom half of the Premier League. Yes, I know the standards are different at Manchester United, but getting rid of someone because they finished 6th to replace them with someone who's never finished in the top half of the table makes zero sense to me for Manchester United Football Club. You don't give the job to someone who's going to learn on the job. They come into the job with the experience and the knowledge that shows they are ready to take on the biggest job in football. And as far as I can see, there's nothing in Gareth Southgate's CV that shows he's ready yet. Southgate has also never signed a top player who's really shone. If you look at Middlesbrough, he signed some good players. I think his biggest signing at one point was Alphonso Alves, who didn't really work out, was part of the team that got relegated, although he did get a brace against Manchester United at the Riverside in the snow, if memory serves. So he's not really got experience there. Erik ten Hag has. Erik ten Hag's made a lot of signings that have worked out. Look at his time at Ajax. And before we get into all this, yes, I know he bought Antony and he paid a lot of money for him and he hasn't worked out at Manchester United, but he has made a lot of good signings. He bought in the likes of Dusan Tadic at Ajax and turned him into one of the best attackers in the world for a little while. I think in his first season, he scored about 38 goals. He also brought in the likes of Lisandro Martinez. I think he signed him twice. Gave Daley Blind a rejuvenated career when he went back to Ajax. So he's made some good signings. He's also nurtured players. He's nurtured talent, Erik ten Hag. If you look at what he did with at Ajax, with the likes of Frenkie de Jong, with the likes of Donny van der Beek, with the likes of Matthijs de Ligt, he got the best out of these young players and progressed them. You could even give him some credit for the way he's handled Kobbie Mainoo. Has Gareth Southgate nurtured young players? He's worked with young players. He worked with Harry Kane when he was younger. Do you give him credit, though, for what Harry Kane has done? I think when it comes to players like Marcus Rashford, like Saka, like Foden, the reason that they've gone on to do well isn't because they've worked with Gareth Southgate. I think it's because they've progressed physically and because of what they've done at club level and what their managers have done with them. So I don't think you can say that Gareth Southgate is someone with a reputation for nurturing young talent. I also don't think you can say he's someone with a reputation for signing players and getting the best out of them. We just haven't seen that from him. He hasn't won any trophies. Yes, he's got to a quarter-final, a semi-final, a final. He's got to third place in the Nations League, but he hasn't won anything. Erik ten Hag, who you're talking about getting rid of, has won trophies. He won lots of trophies in Holland and he even won a trophy in England. And you can't just dismiss that. People go, it's only the League Cup. Well, lots of other United managers failed to win anything. So it seems a little bit odd. You get rid of a manager who's won something with someone who hasn't won anything. For me, it just seems like a really weird decision to get rid of Erik ten Hag, despite the faults he's had this season, and replace him with someone who's just not really got any pedigree at club level whatsoever and has done well at England without truly amazing. I think the only time we should see Gareth Southgate in the Old Trafford dugout is for Soccer Aid, despite what some United legends may say. Get involved in the chat in the comments. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you want to see Gareth Southgate replace Erik ten Hag, or do you think, like I do, he's just not the right man for the job?